Danny, I want to show you some tweets. So here's David Sirota. Everyone knows he's the hitman for the... By the way, as badass as David Sirota is to everybody, he's the badass. He's still not allowed to come on my show, just so you know. They're not... the order went out. They are not allowed to come on my show. And I asked him if he would ask permission from Bernie, and they didn't give it to him. So he did tweet this out. I wonder if we will... So there's a sheriff. So around the nation, sheriffs turn to court to stop foreclosures. The sheriffs are doing that. Sheriffs are trying to stop foreclosures on people, not politicians, not the city council in Los Angeles, not the mayor, not fucking Andrew Cuomo, not AOC, not Bernie. They're doing nothing. They're doing less than nothing. They're pretending they're doing something, and that makes people think they're doing something, which is worse. So David Sirota tweets out about that. He goes, I wonder if we will see any sheriffs muster the courage to refuse to evict people during the coronavirus. Here is some lost history from 1983. So I tweeted out, I wonder if the Bernie Sanders or his campaign will have the courage to organize a rent mortgage student loan strike, or use their email list to help organize a general strike, or even really have any idea on what to do right now except make impotent requests online. So I just want to tell David Sirota, because if he's watching, the truth is one who seeks to achieve freedom by petitioning those in power to give it to him has already failed. Regardless of the response, to beg for the blessing of authority is to accept that the choice is the master's alone to make, which means that the person is already, by definition, a slave. Bernie Sanders is a slave. David Sirota is a slave. Everybody who works in that campaign is a slave. They've got people from the Center for American Progress in the middle of that campaign. There are moles inside that campaign, handpicked by Bernie. Bernie never ran a campaign to win. He forfeited this campaign early on when he wouldn't critique Barack Obama's 8 years and Joe Biden's part in it. And if you're not going to tell people how you got Trump, you're never going to be able to take power from him. And that's a cowardly move. His entire campaign is full of cowards. He's a coward, and his campaign is a fucking colossal failure. Do you disagree with any of that?
Well, what I will say is that, Frederick Douglass said you can't, power concedes nothing without a demand. And the Bernie Sanders campaign and the rest of this, honestly, the rest of this progressive movement happening within the Democratic Party really began with one fatal flaw, I believe, and that is believing that the Democratic Party just went astray. Yeah. That somehow we need to get it back to its old values, its own policy, its old policies of serving working people. But what I'll say to that is they've always, I think, gotten history incorrect.
Yes.
The New Deal was not enacted because FDR was a nice guy.
Right.
It was enacted because there were thousands upon thousands of strikes happening.
That's right.
That there was workers' actions everywhere. Entire plants were being shut down. And FDR himself had to say, well, we got to enact these reforms to save capitalism because capitalism is going to fall apart. And oh no, they may actually look abroad and see that socialism is over there and we can't have that here. That's actually how the New Deal was enacted. And so it's backwards to think that electing a Democrat into the presidency, or honestly anywhere, Congress, will give you the conditions you need to enact change. And I always believe that was the incorrect strategy, that the correct strategy is first to organize workers to make those demands, and then, maybe just then, candidates, even the most progressive of the kind, will actually be held accountable to them. You cannot have any sort of social change unless the movement is accountable to the people.
And it's time that the movement holds Bernie accountable. And they're not. None of them are doing it. None of them. Even the strongest people I thought that would fucking recognize this moment, they're not. The moment is right now. This is a moment made for Bernie Sanders, made for AOC, made for Elizabeth Warren, made for Sherrod Brown, made for anybody who claims to be who they say they are. Bernie says he's the organizer in chief. He's not organizing shit. He's fucking lying to you again. Bernie Sanders is not who you think he is. He's a feckless fucking coward. That's who he is. As Chris Hedges says, our fucking leaders are ineffective at best and venal at worst, and it's our job to make them fear us. Make him fear us. He voted for this because he doesn't fear you. He knows that you'll never fucking hold his feet to the fire, ever. He went and sucked Hillary Clinton's cock for months, and then he fucking didn't hold the DNC accountable after they cheated us, after they fucking defrocked his delegates, after they turned the lights out on him, put sound cannons on him. He did fucking nothing. And he's doing nothing now. He's doing less than nothing because he's pretending he's doing something. He's tweeting that he's doing something. I'm working on a fourth stimulus. Suck my dick. You have no leverage to get anything done. Quit tweeting bullshit and start organizing. Here's his tweet. You want to see his tweet? Here's his tweet. So now this tweeted out, listen to this powerful words of this Amazon employee in New York where workers walked off the job to demand better safety precautions in response to COVID. That was March 31st. An hour ago, Bernie retweeted that and said, Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, Amazon, pays zero in federal income taxes. Workers unable to get the protection they need. The greed has got to end. I stand with Amazon workers who are fighting for not a plan on how to make it end. You just had a chance. You just spent for $4.2 trillion. You did fucking nothing to make sure that happened. All this is empty rhetoric. You're flapping your gums with no plan to do anything. You feckless loser. You just signed away a generation. You're going to be dead in a few years, and the rest of the country's going to live in a corporate fucking nightmare, and you're bragging that you got us a water fountain inside the prison they just built us. And this is nothing. What does this tell you, Danny? What does this tell you? What does this tell you? Does this tell you that Bernie has any ideas on what to do right now in the worst fucking crisis in our history, and he calls himself the organizer-in-chief? What does this fucking tweet tell you?
It tells me that the movement to elect Bernie Sanders right now is tailing the crisis. It's behind the moment.
Yes.
And, you know, one of the things that Black Agenda Report has always brought up and that has not always been popular is that, you know, Bernie Sanders has always been an imperialist pig in a lot of ways.
Yes.
He went along with Russiagate.
Yes.
He ceded so much ground in that area,
which is weak and cowardly and feckless and self-destructive
and dangerous. Because right now we're in a moment where COVID-19 is spreading across the United States, and there's such a need to focus on the complete failures of the way that the U.S. is organized and structured. And now we have the Washington establishment targeting China and its own response to COVID-19, which has been far more effective than the United States's. And, you know, because Bernie Sanders and the rest of the social democratic so-called movement, left movement here, just hasn't ever challenged the U.S. foreign policy establishment, it leaves us very wide open to a dangerous scenario to come, which is it's time. The U.S. imperialists will say, hey, it's time to blame China. They're getting ready to do it now. And then we're on our way to an even more intense war once this crisis settles, or maybe while this crisis is happening. And Bernie Sanders and the rest are just not able to challenge that. And when I see a tweet like that, I see someone who is behind the crisis, a movement that is behind the crisis, and one that doesn't have the vision and the foresight to understand just how dangerous this moment is, and that there are workers right now who need leadership, and they're not getting that from anyone in the political aisle, and it leaves us vulnerable to so many dangerous things, and that we need to take that one to heart, I think.
I'll show you. I got some more for you. I just went to his Twitter feed right before I came here. Here's another one. Clark County suspends union contract for UMC healthcare workers in the middle of this pandemic, right? So that was tweeted out. And he goes, healthcare workers risk their lives every day to fight this pandemic, and they deserve to have their collective bargaining rights protected. Clark County must reverse. Again, no plan, not an idea in sight. Not a fucking idea in sight. Everyone else is leading, and he's just tweeting about it. Mm-hmm. That's what all their genius fucking brains inside their campaign. All the fucking morons who thought it was smart not to talk to real progressive media and face questions, and because they couldn't face a question from a dumb motherfucker like me, Bernie goes on The View and he gets his ass handed to him by a dummy like fucking Whoopi Goldberg. He gets his ears boxed in by questions that are 4 years old. That's how fucking horrible he is. That's how little he wants to win this race. That's what a feckless leader he is. That's what a bullshit campaign he's run this entire time, because it never had a vision. It never would critique power, ever. It wouldn't. Have you ever seen Bernie Sanders critique fucking Barack Obama?
No, and that's one of the things that Black Agenda Report talks about all the time is the Obama effect, the fact that there are untouchables within the Democratic Party establishment that even the so-called most progressive elements of the Democratic Party refuse to call out and refuse to demand anything better from. It's not even a matter of calling them out for what they represent structurally. Even just challenging their collaboration in the most heinous policies that have affected working people would go a long way in building the consciousness that his movement and the rest of the working class outside of his movement really needs right now. And you know, it's just incredible to be living through this, I think, and seeing just how ineffective it is to just try to wage a civil campaign within the Democratic Party to win reforms really is right now. I think that's what is really being exposed here, is that you can't run a campaign the way that the Democratic Party and the rest of the political establishment wants politicians to run the campaign and do anything other than serve the rich and serve the elite. And I hope that that's the lesson that comes out of all this, because I think it will generate some creativity so long as people don't fall into despair just because the leader that they followed is not doing what ultimately they were never going to do, which is to bring these massive social changes that we needed. They were not going to do it because not only can they not do it within the Democratic Party structure, but they themselves possess their own inherent limitations individually as folks that want to remain in the Democratic Party and that have a vested interest in doing so. If they didn't, they wouldn't be there anymore after taking all this abuse.
Here is some more tweets from our friend Bernie Sanders. I went to it. There it is. Every hour he tweets out something. He says, in the wealthiest country in history, it is unacceptable that public schools are crumbling. No, it's acceptable because you accepted it. When you say it's unacceptable, that means that you wouldn't vote for something that does that. You did. He said the vote yes for MPS and vote yes for our kids' school district funding referendums on the ballot in Milwaukee and Racine are exactly the kind of investment Wisconsin students need and deserve. Well, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? You got some more fucking bullshit, flowery bullshit. Under that, he says, in the midst of the exploding unemployment and public health crisis, Congress must pass new and unprecedented emergency legislation that guarantees health care for all and allows every American worker to continue receiving their paycheck. Working in details now. Oh, are you? You're working the details in now, April 2nd, you fucking asshole? Now you're doing it? Now you're working on those details now? Because you didn't even know what was in the fucking bill that you passed the first time because you didn't write any of it, although you told people you did? Can you fucking believe that, Danny?
What is so just infuriating about all of this, too, is that just think about the language that's being used in these tweets. In a moment that calls for even just some 2016 Bernie Sanders-esque, we need a political revolution, we need socialism, we're not even getting that. In a crisis that demands even more than anything that he's ever called for throughout his political career. And so it just, I think, gives us insight into how social democratic movements like the one Bernie Sanders was trying to lead will only fall flat if they stay within a party that is hostile to them. And the whole Democratic Party base moved to the right over the last 4 years.
Yes.
And Bernie Sanders' message has, on the one hand, criticized the establishment sometimes, but on the other hand, has, I think, gone even into more of a capitulation and a conciliatory tone towards the very folks who are just as rabid, if not more rabidly against him than even in 2016 when they underestimated his campaign. They knew the whole establishment knew what was coming when Bernie Sanders decided to run again. They study their own folks, and they had all the weapons out there ready to chop off his campaign. And ultimately, the head was chopped off, and Bernie Sanders didn't say a word about it. And
didn't say a word about it.
His attempts to criticize Joe Biden have fallen so flat that it's almost as if
it's like
they might as well not have happened.
It's like a joke. So, because the only thing people want to know is, is the guy decent, and can he beat Donald Trump? And Bernie Sanders says, he's my good friend, he's a decent guy, and he can beat Donald Trump. People are like, okay, well, that's it. Show's over. And I'm voting for Joe Biden. And that's it. And Bernie's such a shitty campaigner, and his campaign, they're so stupid. Half of them are stupid, and the other half are just career climbers, and they're looking for their next job. That's exact. And he's got his campaign filled with those motherfuckers. And there wasn't enough people he could throw under the bus. This campaign, it was Zephyr Teachout. He threw under the bus when she told the truth about Joe Biden. Not only would he not tell the truth about it, but he wouldn't let his surrogates tell the truth. He literally betrayed Zephyr Teachout publicly for telling the truth. Isn't that amazing?
Yes, it's amazing in all the wrong ways. You know, I was just in China before the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. And what is very striking to me about China, contrary to what many people may believe in the United States, is that their leadership, their political leadership, is wholly accountable to the people, because if it's not, they're not going to have a job anymore. Whether it's local officials, whether it's provincial government officials, or all the way up to the state council, they won't have a job if they're not accountable to the people. And this moment here in the United States just shows how not even the most progressive elements of the so-called Democratic Party is accountable to anybody. Because if they were, then those who are talking about Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, like Bernie Sanders, AOC, they would be trying to figure out right now, when already before the COVID-19 crisis, we had people dying without health insurance, people dying because of poverty. And now, when that's going to be escalated tenfold because of the COVID-19 crisis, it seems like the message is becoming even more watered down.
Yes.
And that's troubling.
Yes.
And it just goes, a crisis, of course, shows who we all really are.
That's right.
What we really stand for. And if we're not able to take even the modicum of the risk necessary to inspire people, this is a dangerous moment. People need to be inspired. If they go into despair, the politics of the United States will only move further to the right. That happened during the 2007-2008 financial crisis. That's happened every crisis for the last 40 years. That's exactly what's happened, is that people have moved to the right because they weren't inspired, they were pushed into despair. And so this is a dangerous moment, and I think Bernie Sanders and AOC and the rest, they're not stepping up. Tulsi Gabbard endorsing Joe Biden, that's just the definition of not stepping up to the plate.
I know. That's why I'm going scorched earth on all of them. They're all fucking feckless. They're all worthless. And what we should be telling people is this. Hey, Bay Area, San Francisco, Richmond, Albany, Oakland, Berkeley, people have made an online hub for the rent strike, and the number of active strikes is growing. So go to bayareastrike.org. That's what Bernie Sanders should be doing. He should be fucking using his email to do this strategically. He's not doing anything. Here is Elizabeth Warren. She says, yesterday, we told Secretary Mnuchin that it was ridiculous to require Social Security recipients to file tax returns in order to receive a stimulus check. Good news. Last night, he reversed that policy. This is why we've got to stay in the fight, she says. Danny, what are you? So here's what I tweeted out. I go, good news. You know that prison I just let corporate America build with $5 trillion we gave them for free while robbing you? Well, I'm going to get you a water fountain inside the prison. You're welcome, Senator Warren.
Yeah, stay in the fight, Elizabeth Warren, who stayed in it just long enough to not only get a lot of super PAC money, but also to damage Bernie Sanders' campaign to the point of no return. So she stayed in the fight, and now she is appealing to bankers in order to get just enough done so older folks don't have to apply for their taxes in order to get a stimulus check that they won't see in a couple months. And they're going to be even in worse shape than normal. But, that's a victory, I guess, when, it's a victory when things get worse.
Here's another one. Here's Bernie Sanders. This is from 11:30 a.m. today. Today, this is what he tweets out. April 2nd, the day after Rent Day. He's and 6.6 million Americans applied for unemployment, which means they're losing their health insurance, right? Millions more will lose their jobs in the coming weeks. In the midst of this horrific crisis, Congress must pass a new unprecedented emergency bill that guarantees income and health care for all Americans. Working on the details now. He says that today. Because I've been doing show after show and tweeting at his campaign and texting and DMing people in his campaign asking, what the fuck are you guys doing right now besides tweeting? Are you doing anything? What is your plan? I know you're not allowed to come on my show, but pretty please ask Bernie or his wife if for permission to come on my show, because I know you can't do what you want. You have to get permission, and they won't. They won't come on the show to tell, but they're now starting to tweet shit like this because I've been laying it in their fucking ass for a fucking week straight. And do you see how bullshit this is? So I tweeted this. I go, why the fuck was this not in the first $5 trillion bill that robs us all blind and cements inequality for a generation that you voted for? After you gave all your leverage away, now you're going to somehow take care of the workers? What leverage does he have right now to do that, Danny?
He doesn't have any.
And none.
And what's striking about this is that the St. Louis Federal Reserve already said that unemployment in the United States was soon going to be 30% plus. And
greater than the Great Depression.
That was before the stimulus bill was pushed through. So, there's just no excuse to now that people are flooding the unemployment website and trying to get unemployment now after the stimulus bill was passed is to try to protect them. They're already unemployed, and as you said, they're losing their health insurance. All of the he's actively
fucking like. What does that tweet do? What is that? Now people they're desperate. They're scared. They don't have income. They don't know if to pay their credit card bill or their heating bill or their electric bill or their their health insurance bill or to pay their rent or their mortgage or their car note. They don't know what to fucking do. And Bernie Sanders is doing nothing. And he's tweeting that I'm going to do something later. Congress isn't even in session. You're a fucking asshole. And so is your campaign, filled with fucking feckless assholes. You're afraid of me. That's how I know you're a pussy, and your campaign is a colossal failure. And it has been in history. This campaign is one of the biggest failures ever. And it's because you guys are fucking cowards. You couldn't even come on my show to answer a little question. And that's why Whoopi Goldberg boxes your fucking ears in and makes you look as dumb as a demented Joe Biden. You can't even out-debate Joe Biden because you're that much of a coward. The whole campaign is worthless. And you're letting us down right now. You're doing nothing. Stop tweeting. And start organizing. And they won't do it. So hopefully this wakes them up. So people say that I'm a loose cannon, Jimmy Dore's whatever the fuck. You can't. So that's why I have on someone like you, who's a fucking real smarty pants motherfucker, who wrote a book about this shit and writes for the Black Agenda Report. So there you go, right in your fucking asses.
Yeah, Black Agenda Report has always been about taking the risks necessary when it wasn't okay to do so. It wasn't okay to criticize Barack Obama for anything for the 8 years that he was in office. Black Americans had a hard time with it, but the entire progressive left had a really hard time with it. But yet we continue to do so because we felt that it was important to not leave workers hanging, not leave poor Black Americans hanging, not leave the whole world hanging when Barack Obama was subsidizing the military machine more than Bush, when he was literally giving $700 million to police departments worth of military weaponry, when he was doing all of these things, bailing out the banks in the trillions, when he was pushing through the Affordable Care Act, which was a giveaway to corporate insurance and pharmaceutical industries. We didn't stand back and say, well, it's just not time yet. We need to organize a political campaign that's progressive like Bernie Sanders. And we just need to let those things happen because that's the civil thing to do. And, we're scared of what people will think of us on the progressive left. We're scared of the reaction that we'll get from the population. No, that's not what politics is about. Politics is a struggle for power. And if you're not interested in struggling for power, then you're not doing politics. You're ultimately doing careerism, maybe. Maybe you're doing some sort of charity effort, some sort of education campaign. But it's not politics. Politics is a struggle for power. That's what's happening on the world stage right now. That's what's happening when the United States levels intense sanctions on Iran as it struggles with COVID-19. That's what happened. That's what's happening with the U.S. Demonizing China at a moment where hundreds of thousands of people in the United States are going to die from COVID-19. That's what's happening when Jack Ma, a Chinese Communist Party billionaire, is literally donating masks and testing kits in the millions to every African country. And the United States doesn't even have a progressive left politician that can call out the complete wrongdoing and the complete injustice that the Democratic Party establishment is waging. That must be taken home and must be addressed because we're just going to get more of the same. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse if
oh my God, people.
Yeah, it'll get worse.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omar and AOC and Roke, they're pretending. Well, maybe they're this dumb. There's a good chance that they actually still don't know what's in the bill, and they still don't know what's actually going to be happening to their country, and what the fuck kind of a nightmare Mad Max scenario is about to be unleashed on them. And they're going to be unmasked for being pieces of shit, worthless, because they're worse than worthless. Because if they weren't there, people would actually be upset. But because they're there, they think they're doing something, and they're not doing anything. And so people are just sitting around going, I don't know what to fucking do. Such fucking
exactly.
They're such fucking assholes. They're such assholes, all of them.
And I think that, when people come after you about being angry about this, I think it just shows that, those folks obviously care more about being polite, civility, the bourgeois Democratic Party civility that seems to just have people so enticed by, people fawn over Andrew Cuomo, etc. They won't get so angry about that, but then they'll criticize those who do get angry about it. I think that's such it's such a double standard, such an example of hypocrisy. I think that right now we need more anger. And of course, it doesn't negate the progress that's been made in terms of the consciousness about Medicare for all and the Green New Deal and all of that. But this is not an ordinary moment. This is a crisis. This is an economic crisis. This is a crisis of legitimacy that's facing the entire social system of capitalism and imperialism here in the United States. That's an opportunity. And if we're not angry about the fact that this opportunity is being missed, that right now Donald Trump is taking advantage of the opportunity for his own benefit, and that's probably the thing that's not being talked about, and the thing that people are going to ultimately underestimate after this is his ratings his approval ratings are going up, and he's not even getting the kind of criticism that you would think from the left around COVID-19. People are relying on the corporate media to do that, and they just give him billions of airtime. So if the Democratic Party and this progressive left is so keen on getting rid of Donald Trump, but they're not willing to face their own enemies in blue right next to them, we're going to see 4 more years of Donald Trump post-COVID-19 crisis, and the likes of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi continue to set the agenda for the left, which means that there is no left. So we're going to have to figure out what's next from here, because obviously it's not a Bernie Sanders-like campaign or an AOC-like campaign. That's not going to get the results that I think so many people still believe in. And that's okay to believe in something, but it has to be grounded in reality. And right now, the material reality on the ground shows that leaders like that, operating within a hostile structure, will not be able to overcome it. They're more likely to capitulate to it and to keep the status quo going, especially at the level of who determines economic, foreign policy, etc. And that's a reality that's tough to swallow, but it's one that we have to come to grips with.
Hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say the level of mistake was for the progressive movement to put their energy behind a candidate who sheep herded them into the Democratic Party? 1 to 10. 10 being the worst.
Well, I would say that, I would give it about an 8. And the reason why I give it about an 8 is because that 2 margin is an acknowledgement of the actual conditions that existed on the ground. There wasn't, there's a reason why so many folks went for Bernie Sanders again and thought that was the best move to run for president. And, before that in 2018 to try to support all these progressives, which most of them honestly didn't get very far. The material conditions, how things existed, didn't really allow for an alternative to spring. But the rest of it is the subjective conditions, the fact that, it has been time to build that alternative party so we can build that alternative system that we need. And ultimately, these problems maybe could have been foreshadowed in a lot of ways, that the Democratic Party was always going to chew out any sort of progressive sentiment and movement that emerged. That probably could have been predicted. The Democratic Leadership Council, when Clinton and his cronies started that was the beginning of the end of any kind of social welfare liberalism. We're not even talking about radicalism. We're not talking about leftism, socialism. That was the end structurally of the Democratic Party being able to hold that political sentiment within its party structure, because it had organized the most racist and the most corporatist forces into its political party to become what is now the new Republican Party. And the Republican Party is sitting on the cliff, ready to be pushed off, and Donald Trump is now the leader of the Republican Party. That reality, the reality that the Democratic Party was never going to be convinced, was never going to be cajoled or backstroked or whatever into doing what so many folks, so many workers, so many poor people want in this country. And the mistake really lies in that ideological orientation of believing that the Democratic Party can be a vehicle for change. I think that has always been the big mistake. You could run in the Democratic Party and do the things that Bernie Sanders did in 2016 and 2020, but not take the orientation of, well, this is a party for change. We're going to turn the party back to where it once was. You could have done everything without that and perhaps have been even more successful in breaking the party into pieces. That was probably the only hope I ever had with the Bernie Sanders movement and phenomenon as a whole was, maybe the divisions in the Democratic Party will weaken it and make it crumble so we can actually have the room to build a new party. However, what actually has happened is that Bernie Sanders and the rest of his team have unfortunately towed the party line and remained loyal to our enemies, our working class enemies, our class enemies, the ruling class, the oligarchs. To remain loyal to them is a betrayal. But in my opinion, that was always going to be the case. However, now that it's exposed, we have to deal with that in a way that is inspiring, that will help people organize, that will get people going in an independent direction in their political activity and not towards, well, we'll get them next time type of attitude. Because the next 4 years are going to be hell. Because if COVID-19 is a testing ground for what U.S. capitalism and imperialism is really all about, these crises, they don't get better. Climate change is creating these kind of catastrophes. Capitalism is creating these kind of catastrophes all the time. The U.S. war machine is ready to create a catastrophe. It's already doing so in so many places around the world. The catastrophe is here. The crisis is here. The conditions are here for a revolutionary movement. It just cannot be trapped in the Democratic Party. That's the ultimate lesson. And people who don't want to hear that are ultimately selling all of us short. They're abandoning the working class. They're abandoning oppressed people all over the world, because this isn't just about people in the United States.
Right.
We have billions around the world
Right.
who are looking at the United States saying, we need, every time I go somewhere else, I've been to Cuba, I've been to China, we need the United States' government to stop terrorizing us.
Yes.
That is the big message. Whenever you talk to someone, that's it. We need that to end.
Well, guess what? I had a friend, Danny, who used to say this all the time. Whatever we do to people overseas, we're eventually going to do to ourselves. So now we're all our cities are policed by the military, just like we police other cities and other countries that we occupy. So now we have militarized police policing and killing us with impunity. We live in a surveillance state. And now what we do is imperialism is we, rape other countries, overturn their governments, turn them into puppets, regimes, and then we steal their natural resources. So what has actually happened right now is we have a puppet regime in Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Mitch McConnell and Trump that work for Wall Street directly for the industrialists. And so what they've done is they've now fucking toppled over our government, corrupted it, so now it works for them and not us. And now they've hollowed out our economy, given all the money to the richest people. They've done exactly to us. Now we're slaves to the corporation in our own, and poor. We're not we're not taken care of. We're poor, without health care, without any political power, and that's what we've done to ourselves now, what we've done to other countries like Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan, and what we tried to do to Syria, and what we did all through South America, Venezuela. So we've done it to ourselves, haven't we, right now? And that's what people don't realize, that we did it to ourselves now, this time.
And what I would add, too, is, in my book, I talk about how what the United States does abroad in terms of its imperialist wars have actually been happening on U.S. soil for quite a while if Native people and Black people are taken into consideration in their conditions. If we talk about post-Reconstruction and the lynch mob terror that white Americans organized on behalf of the establishment, we can see what conditions of war are like right here. However, that would require us to, and I think this is another fatal flaw of the Bernie Sanders campaign and the rest, that would require us to look at history correctly and to also acknowledge the principal role of white supremacy, and that these real divisions, these real powerful institutional divisions, are critical in understanding what the U.S. does domestically and abroad. That a class-first attitude is, ultimately, I'm a socialist. I believe class is the principal issue. However, if you don't see white supremacy and war on the same level as class, you're ultimately going to leave a lot of people behind. And I think, as much as I don't blame that as being the sole reason why Black people and other sectors of the population didn't just get down with Bernie Sanders, I don't think that's the principal reason, but it does have an impact. If he did stand against the wars, if he did talk about real concrete ways that the U.S.'s history is riddled in this beyond, Donald Trump is a bigot, I think that would have been a game changer in a lot of ways. But this just shows that a movement within the Democratic Party that is oriented within the Democratic Party is designed to leave out very critical aspects of U.S. history, U.S. political economy, the reality on the ground for so many people, especially Black people. Because if you do put that into the equation, you believe you're going to be destroyed. And Bernie Sanders didn't want to be destroyed when, in fact, we needed that right now more than ever. We needed someone in a movement that would take a risk, that would step outside of the lines and give us something more than just, we're going to run for president, we're going to run on these issues. That's what he's doing right now. Those tweets are all about issues. Yeah. Great. It's great that we know about these issues. It's great that we know now that Amazon is robbing working people blind to the point where they're not paying any taxes. Great. We know that. Awesome. What now?
What now?
You know, that's always been the question of, well, what now? Is it winning the presidential election? Because he's not even trying to do that anymore.
No.
He's basically ceded to Biden. We're just waiting for the endorsement, really. He's putting all of his efforts in the COVID-19 campaign, yet the crisis is happening now. And his job, pushing through legislation, is not being done either. So we're left with
less
this
than nothing.
Political vacuum. Yes, it's a vacuum. It's a political vacuum that ultimately, because everyone's inside and quarantining, because we live in such a shithole country that we don't know who really has COVID-19. Actually, those numbers are all probably underreported. Everyone's scared. I was listening to your show and the brave Amazon worker who organized that protest. And, you know, everyone is scared. That's the attitude and the sentiment. And the danger about people being scared is that it reflects on the broader political situation. And Bernie Sanders right now looks scared. The progressive movement looks scared. But this moment is way beyond fear. We need courage. We need risk takers. We need people who are actually about class struggle. We need to be the ones demanding it. And we can't let anyone tell us not to do that. We must demand it.
Go to my Twitter feed. I have even union leaders telling me, Jimmy, lay off Bernie. It's like, stop apologizing for your leaders and start pressuring them. As Chris Hayes says, at best they're ineffective, at worst they're fucking venal, and it's our job to make them fear us, and they don't fucking fear us. AOC flipped us off. Fucking Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, the entire progressive movement flipped us off when they voted for this and then bullshitted us that they got something for us. Bernie bullshitted us that he got an employment in. Michael Bennett wrote that part. That fucking bill was set to pass, and he did a bullshit speech that had no effect on the bill, yet people still say he's fighting for us. You know why? Because he tells them they are, and he's not doing dick.
And you meant Chris Hedges, correct?
Yes.
Not Chris Hayes.
I said Hedges.
Okay.
I meant Hedges. I
want to make sure.
Chris Hayes, he's got the nice guns. Have you seen Chris Hayes' core? He's been doing some great work. His core is really tight now. Chris Hayes, when I look at a newsman, I'm like, I want to know a guy. I want to know a guy who's got a tight core. Right? I don't want to listen to a guy who's flabby in the middle, right? I want to listen to a guy who got core. I want him to tell me how Bernie Sanders is bad for me. That's what I want him to tell me. And Medicare for All doesn't work. That's what I want. I want somebody with a nice core.
They got to get ripped because they have all that money. They all have personal gyms. There's no excuse. We have to have the ripped. We have to have the ripped pundits and media liars.
I remember one of my favorite things. I was sick. I had the flu a couple years ago, and I was watching the New Year's Eve Rockin' Eve with Kathy Griffin, a famous neoliberal. And she was, but she's still funny. And she was on with Anderson Cooper. They were the team, and so she's like, "Do you have any New Year's resolutions?" And he said, "Yeah, I guess I should get back in the gym, and get." And Kathy Griffin said, "Really? You're a reporter, and it wasn't like maybe learn a different language or find something out. It's about I need to get abs. That's what's going to help you." It was exactly the perfect fucking, and she had no idea what she was doing, but she was exposing the entire fucking U.S. news media at that moment. His resolution was to get abs. Their number one news guy.
Shallow and callous as it gets, huh?
And as it gets. And of course, Anderson Cooper is already compromised with the CIA. And that's what they
Yes.
don't tell you anymore. They don't tell you that, hey, you know, he's working for the CIA. You know, the CIA, that they don't have to embed them anymore in the newsroom. They just put them right on air. They're sitting in the green rooms all fucking day, the heads of the CIA and shit, and then they bring them on as their expert. You're supposed to bring on someone to debunk the CIA guy. You're not supposed to bring the CIA guy on, you fucking morons. But of course, Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes knows that, but they're corrupted, so they do it anyway because they're lying to you for money. And that's who Chris Hayes and Rachel Maddow is, and fake tough guy Lawrence O'Donnell and Chris Matthews. You know what happened to him. So they're all worthless, and they're all liars, and they're all bought and paid for. And I'm the and even in right now, even in the progressive space, as they call it, no one's fucking putting the pressure on the politicians. So they've proven themselves to also be as feckless as the leaders they cling to. And so I'm encouraging them all to stand up and fucking do something and start making them afraid of you instead of trying to make fucking friends with them or lying at their behest because you know your audience likes them, which is what I see happening right now. A lot of people growing their audience and they know where it's coming from and they're afraid to tell those people the truth. They're just like Sean Hannity. It's fucking amazing to watch it happen. It's amazing for me to watch them people on the left lie at the behest of politicians they like so they can build their audience. It's disgusting. Hey, thanks for the lane. If anybody wants to hear the truth about what's happening right now with the stimulus, what's happening with Nancy Pelosi, AOC, the squad, and your progressive leaders and Bernie Sanders, they have to come to this show because nobody else is fucking doing it. Danny Haifong from the Black Agenda Report, I want to thank you for coming on. Thanks for illuminating our audience. Thanks for confirming every goddamn thing I've been saying on this show. And if there's anything you'd like to say, please, I'll give you the last word.
Sure. I just want to validate the need to have outlets, media outlets like yours, like Black Agenda Reports, which actually speaks to the reality on the ground that is happening with folks and doesn't do it in a way that panders to any section of the elite, to any politician, to any aspect of the Democratic Party. That's not what politics is about. You know, when I came back from China, I was floored by just how much investment has been done in infrastructure, how there's no homelessness in China. I don't think many people know that. How the biggest achievements that China has pushed through over the course of the years has been building the best high-speed rail and the most high-speed rail in the world, having the most renewable energy production in the world, eliminating absolute poverty and lowering poverty at a rate that accounts for all global poverty reduction in the last 30 years. So after I come back from China, you come back to this country where the system is in decline, capitalism is in decline, and you have an election that is bought and paid for, and Bernie Sanders tries to once again do the same thing that failed in 2016, and there's all this hope that it was going to work out this time, you know, Iowa and then Nevada. But what wasn't being said and what needs to be said always is that in order to get things done for the people like China has done or like Cuba has done, they have a medication there that actually helps prevent the spread of COVID-19, interferon, which we can't get here because of sanctions. And in order to get the things that you want, you have to fight for power. And that's what's happened in Cuba. That's what's happened in China, regardless of what people want to talk about, mistakes. And, you know, the people in the United States love to talk about other countries before they talk about their own. Just think about Venezuela, poor Venezuela being sanctioned, and the U.S. is actually mobilizing war against Venezuela right now. They're paying small and medium business workers, all staff, their full wages, despite being under sanctions and having an economy that's being crashed by the United States. In order to get the things that we want, we need to fight for power. That's what people around the world are doing, and that's what we need to aspire to. And if that means criticizing and condemning the actions and behaviors of political leaders that we may like just a little bit more than the Democratic Party establishment, like Bernie Sanders, then so be it. We have to do it, and we have to do it now in order to build the type of consciousness that will get us an alternative party, that will hopefully get us that alternative arrangement, that socialist arrangement that so many young folks are really looking for right now.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?